I brought pump protects to the party. Pump. I brought pump protects to the party.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of the one, the only, the PDH Pod, a Magic the Gathering podcast dedicated to the total exploration of the Pauper Commander format. I am your host, Brad V, and this time we're not going to go around the table as much as we're just going to go straight across it to my co-host from the East Coast, Dave the Alkadron Vader. How are you doing this fine evening?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing very well. I'm in my nice air-conditioned closet recording a podcast with you, so that's good. It's like the first of 3 consecutive 100-degree days outside, so it is boiling everywhere else.
I had a really nice day outside today. It's like mid-70s, cloudy, overcast. Went for a nice walk and came back not covered in sweat. It was pretty good.
No, I can't even walk to my truck and back without having to shower. It's terrible. But yeah, it's just you and I tonight. Liam is buried in schoolwork this week, but does send the regards that they couldn't be here. The show topic was kind of his idea, but we ran with it, so we're gonna take it from him. And wish he could be here. We'll miss him though.
I feel like in many ways Liam is a very good foil to me. So we're gonna see how this goes recording without him.
Yep, I think we'll be good. He got to do the collaboration episode without you.
This makes us even. There's something.
This
I
is
don't know.
payback.
Who's keeping score?
All right, there you go. Or close to it. Yeah, anyway, tonight we're going to talk about basically the nuts and bolts of what makes a particular card playable in PDH as opposed to EDH, but more of like a grand view. You know, when it's not like we're going to go through every card in Pauper or anything like that, but more of a philosophy standpoint on what you're looking at in PDH as opposed to the big brother EDH. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put this. We talked a little bit about this topic before we started, and for a minute I was like, the topic that you've stated could mean lots of different things. How do I know that I'm interpreting this correctly? But yeah, I like this. I'm ready.
Yep, you filled out most of the show notes, and I think you pretty well nailed it on the head, at least for what I had in my mind. So I think we're just going to get right into it.
If we're both wrong,
in general,
Liam can correct us on the next episode.
That's right. It's still 2-1 if we're wrong. So
sorry,
majority. Oh, that's okay. Basically, cards in general, like PDH, obviously they are much less explosive than EDH. You know, we don't have turn 1 Soul Ring. We don't have mana crypts and that sort of thing to sort of get us to where we want to be as early as turn 2, turn 3 sometimes.
Right. The closest we have to actual fast mana are cards like Lotus Petal or Dark Ritual, which are actively bad in PDH for reasons we'll talk about in a minute. If you look at things like Soul Ring, which are perfectly ubiquitous in EDH, 99% of decks play Soul Ring. The closest thing we have to that is Arcane Signet maybe, or Bonder's Ornament. They're much slower mana locks.
Yep. Ornament's actually kind of a staple in both formats, though, which is kind of neat.
I believe that, yeah. I don't think I've played an EDH since Ornament came out, but I'm ready to believe that it is a staple in EDH. Yeah. It got banned in
It shows up in enough precons, though. Yeah, it sure did. That was, it was a while ago too. It was painful at first, but we didn't miss it.
Tell me that you don't play Tron without saying you don't play Tron.
Right. Another thing that you'll notice right off the bat, too, a lot of EDH players will notice right off the bat is, literally at common, at the Pauper level, we don't have wheels. You know, those are the sort of thing that mechanic or that gameplay style can drastically change hand sizes, it can change board states, and we just don't really have anything like that necessarily.
Right, which is a huge difference in PDH. I mentioned, Lotus Petal and Dark Ritual being pretty bad. Those cards are okay in formats where you have access to Wheel of Fortune and other time twisters effects, because you can spend these cards from your hand very freely and then just replenish your hand very easily. In PDH, you can never replenish your hand easily. If you're putting cards in your hand, you have to work for it.
Yeah, you got to build your whole deck around it.
Much. There are decks that do it, like Quasar keeps a full hand, Sir Eleanor keeps a full hand. It can be done.
Yeah.
It can't be done casually. So
right.
Every single card you have is a resource, and you cannot afford to burn cards from your hand on an effect that's as weak as a treasure token. So Lotus Petal just doesn't see the play.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to to put it. And in some corner case decks, sure, Lotus Petal can be played in Storm. It can do this and that if you care about affinity for some reason. But for the most part, it really is just a very pricey treasure token in our format.
Like treasure tokens aren't worth cards.
Right. And another thing too, like the wheels sort of change, they dramatically change hand sizes and what's going on in everybody's game state sort of thing. We also don't have cards that amass huge board states. Like you put in the notes here, Rise of the Dark Realm. That I think that's a perfect example. Like it's one card that will instantly change the game in your favor by a huge margin. You know, we don't really have anything like that. Even like sort of like with Lotus Petal, we have spells that'll get us one, maybe two creatures out of the graveyard or a bunch of creatures to our hand, but then we still have to do the work to get them into play to actually affect the board state itself.
If you are creating a board state in PDH, you have to be really invested in that plan. Like you can eventually come up with these board states where if someone walked by your game, you'd be like, "Oh wow, did you just resolve a Rise of the Dark Realms?" And it's like, no, I spent the last 4 turns putting every resource I had into creating this very slowly.
Mm-hmm.
But the decks that do that can do that because they are designed entirely around that theme. They're very all in and they're very dedicated. This is your Child of the Pack decks, your V2 Guys of Guild Mage decks. I was playing just this weekend against an Iridescent Horn Beetle deck. It was pretty explosive, but it was explosive because the entire deck was designed around this one idea.
Right.
So you have to be very dedicated. And you also have to be very dedicated to turning that into a win. Like if you're making this massive board state of tokens, like Rise of the Dark Realms will get you, whatever, I don't know what they're even called, primordials. Like it'll get you massive, huge, rare bombs out of other people's graveyards. Like our cards that build up a board state are going to get you 1/1 Sacralids or 3/3 Centaurs. So they're not going to win you the game without all help. So your deck also has to be dedicated to these, righteous charge cards to just give you a big anthem for the turn. That's as close as we get to what's it called, Crater Hoof.
Yeah,
as close as we get to Crater Hoof is
yeah.
you meet in a tavern, which is it's a great card for us.
Yeah, which is +2/+2.
So.
And that's the only real green anthem we have. So, and then on the flip side of amassing a huge board state, we don't really have ways to deal with huge board states, other than nausea effects, -1/-1, fire cannonade, breath weapon, that sort of thing. They are very effective because of the nature of Pauper, but we just don't have wraths as EDH players know them.
Yeah, there's no real wraths. There's a couple. There's very few wraths. There's no cyclonic rifts.
Right.
Nothing in the same way that we don't have the Rise of the Dark Realms that lets you just whoops a board state. We don't have any the cards that whoops the board state's gone. There are a few that obviously deserve honorable mentions. We have Pestilence, we have Crypt Rats. If you're brave, you can run Swirl and Sandstorm. It doesn't always work though.
Right. You still have to work for that.
Yeah,
as
that's
well.
the thing. You have to work for it. Those are the only 3 cards that can very reliably. Oh no, I guess Bloodfire Infusion.
Okay, yeah.
Those are the only cards that can very reliably wipe a collection of 3 bucks.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, there's a bunch of other smaller things. Your fumes, nauseating, something.
Yeah, there's suffocating fumes, and then there's just straight up nausea. Uh-huh.
Nausea, yeah, and the cannonade, the breath weapon, Evankar's Justice. You just got Arms of Hadar. There's a handful of options that will deal with 2 bucks.
Right.
There's very few that can handle 3 bucks, and they're all damage based.
Yeah, they are all damage based. Yep. I mean, look at
Pestilence. Yeah.
I mean, Pestilence is obviously probably the best one we have, but you also have to work to not die from it yourself.
Yeah. That's the thing with all of this. You have to work really hard to make these things work. And there's no easy shortcuts here. There was in the Discord a while back. Someone was compiling they were trying to create a very comprehensive list of all of the board wipes in the format. And people kept on suggesting well, if you do an infinite combo and you get infinite mana, then Capsize is a board wipe. And it's well, okay, I guess. If you do an infinite combo and you cast infinite spells in 1 turn, then Temporal Fissure is a blue board wipe. And it's I feel like you're not understanding what I want out of
Right.
this.
Well, if you can make infinite creatures with Sprout Swarm, then that's a combo.
Yeah, right? Like, I guess technically you're not wrong, but that's not, like, I don't want to see that in a list of board wipes. Like, when I have to dedicate my entire deck around.
That's not really the spirit of the question.
Like,
right.
You could argue that that's a win condition, like a payoff for your infinite combo. Like, don't call it board wipe. Like, you're not fooling anyone here.
No.
And even if it is a board
100%.
wipe, like, you still have to work really hard.
Yeah, you got to work really hard towards it and hope that there's no interaction, that there's no hiccups, that you play it all right, that you time yourself right with your spells and the stack and everything else. That's one reason I just don't typically play combos, because I mess it up probably more than I actually win with combos. I'll get like 3 steps down the line and I'll be like, oh, I wasn't actually supposed to do that 4 cards ago, so I guess I passed my turn.
One of the reasons I built Lazy Guild Mage and Parcel Beast as competitive decks is so that I could mess them up over and over and over again in an attempt to become a better player.
And kind of like you mentioned, people do get creative with our quote-unquote board wipes. We have things like Gangrenous Zombies and Crypt Rats, obviously, like the bodied version of Pestilence. Bloodfire Dwarf, these are all solid vessels. If you wanted to put Death Touch on them, you add another layer or another card to it. Technically, those are board wipes, but they're a little easier to pull off in some decks, in some scenarios.
They definitely, that's as close as we get to like a Rapid Guy. It's like Crypt Rats with Death Touch.
Yeah. Yep, and it's all in black as opposed to white.
I guess it's just a dwarf. The Bloodfire Dwarf and Bloodfire Infusion are your red versions. But yeah, it's pretty much just in black. Gangrenous Zombies, all the Death Touch, all fun.
Yeah, and then we have like, Krark Clan Shaman, but that's very conditional.
Yeah.
It doesn't hit everything and everywhere.
Yeah, I think the dwarf also doesn't hit fires, but I might be wrong. It's been a while since I've looked at that card. But regardless of what exactly these cards do, the overarching theme is still, you have to work really hard to get these effects. Like, if the goal of this podcast is to compare, EDH card quality to PDH card quality, like the main point we're trying to make in this section is just that, like, we don't have these auto-include staples that are just a single card that does everything you want it to do, all in a nice little package that doesn't require other investment or other cards to make it work right. Like, we don't have the Cypress. We don't have the Rise of the Dark Realms. We barely have Wrath of God. And it's like, getting Wrath of God is a lot of work. Which means, if we're going to be evaluating cards for PDH, we have to keep this in mind, that what you're going for, the goal you want out of your deck, is something that you need to put a lot of effort into making sure that your deck is capable of doing.
Right. Yep. It's not just, can I cast this one spell? It's like, can my deck handle pulling off this combination of cards in this order or in this magnitude of turns, basically?
So this has big implications for evaluating cards. I may have gone off script here a little bit. We can edit this out.
I think we're good. We're actually humming along pretty nicely here. But yeah, all that said, commons are just basically they're less big, they're less splashy, and obviously less explosive than the rares and mythics that Wizards has been just seriously dumping out for Commander over the last 10, 11 years, something like that. We just don't have, like you said, we don't have auto-include staples. We have, if someone comes to you and says, hey, I want to build a deck that does this, EDH can just be like, okay, well, here's 2 spell, or here's a spell, you can run it in this color, here's a different spell for this color. Like in PDH, if you say you want your deck to do X, well, we can give you 22 cards that'll work towards that goal. You just have to figure out how to trim it down to the most efficient way your deck can handle, basically. And a lot of that too, it's EDH cards are often just generically powerful enough to warrant inclusion in almost every deck, where, to sum up kind of what we were saying, in PDH, card evaluation is more based off the synergy of your deck.
I think
basically.
That's a pretty accurate assessment. Cards like Cyclic are just good enough to go into everything that's believed. Capsize is as close as we get, and it's only really powerful if you're going to play these grindy, long, big mana games. Like, your deck has to be able to support the Capsize.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it pretty substantial step down from that. Next, we have like Echoing Truth.
Yeah. I've seen Echoing Truth,
which doesn't work so well in a singleton format.
I've actually seen, like, people are really coming on to Echoing Truth in the competitive scene because of partly because there are some decks that will mass produce a lot of the same token, and Echoing Truth will wipe out all those tokens.
Okay, I can
Partly
see that.
because it can be, if two of your opponents have Bonders ornaments, you can murk both of the Bonders ornaments and then play yours.
Yep.
Like, I think this is the play. I don't know. I don't have it in my competitive decks yet, but I hear people talking about it.
Well, and two, with treasure tokens being slightly ubiquitous in Pauper now, Echoing Truth hits all those too.
I can do something.
Yep. Now they're not everywhere. We don't make 10 of them every turn or whatever, but they are starting to creep their way
better.
in.
Anyway.
Yeah, for better or for worse. They're still fun at this point.
Was it more than that? Oh. Okay.
Nope, that was it.
With all of that said, we're done making fun of how terrible EDH is for now, for a few minutes.
Just for a minute or two.
The thing that I want to move us towards instead is the idea of synergy. The idea that if you're going to evaluate whether or not a card is good, you can't do it in a vacuum. You have to do it in the context of what your deck is trying to do and what else your deck is already doing.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's one of the defining features of PDH, is that with an uncommon commander and 99 commons, it's often the case that your commander is the most powerful card. I mean, I would say most decks that I build, that's the case. Most decks that I see, that's the case. So it's definitely going to be the most powerful card you have access to. So those are going to be generally what your deck is focused on doing. It's going to be the function or the keyword or the mechanic or whatever that your whole deck performs off of, basically.
I agree. I said we were done making fun of EDH. I lied. I'm right back to it.
I lied.
So
it was about a minute.
I'm contrasting this. Your commander is central to your deck's function, the idea of PDH, to some of the old EDH decks that my old friends used to build and play. Like, one of them had a Rashmi deck that was just blue-green good cards. One of them had a Sigarda deck that was just green-white good cards. One of them had Silumgar, the Dragon Lord, that is a control magic, and just black-blue good cards. Like, there was no overarching theme here. It was just like Psycrypt is a good card, Rise of the Dark Elves is a good card. I'll play with the good cards. Like,
I can produce blue mana. I can produce black mana. These are good cards.
Yeah, that was all the thought that went into these decks.
Yep.
In contrast, I have 80 PDH decks. I've counted them, up to 80 of them now. Exactly 0 of those decks are just, these are the good cards in the color. Every single one of my decks is super focused on the themes and the directions that are provided by the command.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that earlier today, and I think I stumbled across back-to-back decks of yours on Moxfield. It was a Mardu deck and a Sultai deck, and I got there because I was thinking, what if I just picked a generic commander whose color identification is Mardu, and I just tried to build a Mardu, like you were saying, a Mardu good stuff pile. And I've tried to do it before with other colors, and in PDH, it is a lot harder than it sounds. Like, when you're looking at just quote unquote good stuff cards, you run out of them with like 30 slots left. And then you just start kind of scraping around to fill the void.
You could probably get close with like Sultai, if you're using the Sultai Soothsayer, because it's just like the card's effect is like dig for answers. And if you're in black and blue and green, like, you can just pack it with rare flicker effects, so you can use the Sultai more to dig more answers, and then like a lot of just removal answers and good stuff. Like, it doesn't give you a clear way to win the game.
No, it's just a pile of cards that are good at what they do. That's not even necessarily saying they work well together. They're just good. So, but yeah, I've noticed that with a lot of the decks you make, they're very, very thematic, and I do like that a lot.
It's one of the consequences of having 80. Like, if your decks are getting closer to that, like, this is like these 30 cards fit the theme, and these 30 cards are just format staples that I put in all my decks. Then like all 80 of your decks are like just
pretty much the same.
Yeah, they overlap too much, and like there's no meaningful distinction. So like, personally, I have leaned away from the idea of staples entirely in my deck building. But like, even without that, like, I still think as a format, this is much less staple-y. I actually looked through, like, in preparing for this episode, I looked through a couple of my decks, and I was like, what are a few cards that are in several of my decks that, like, if someone was just looking at statistics of, like, how often does this card appear, they might think, oh, that might be a staple. And I came up with stuff like Rain Gorgers and Smell Fear and Gleam of Resistance. So, like, we should talk about this.
Yeah, and that's not like, those aren't PDH staples. Like, I had to look up 2 of them because I completely forgot what
They're
they did.
not. I almost said they're not common cards. They are common cards. They are not, what's the word? Well represented? Sure.
Yep.
Some
Let's go with
synonym
that.
for common isn't also a rarity. Yeah, Brain Gorgers is like, it's an incredible card in a Madness deck. It's a garbage card anywhere else.
Right, in a very specific archetype.
Same with Smell Fear and Gleam of Resistance.
Yeah, like Smell Fear, if your deck doesn't care about counters, it's probably unplayable.
Yes.
But in a deck like that, it's an excellent card.
If you're doing the counters, it's that and a fight spell. If you're not doing the counters, it's just a bad fight spell.
Right. Same kind of with Gleam of Resistance. It's great if you care about untapping your creatures. Otherwise, why even have it in your deck, sort of thing? It's not that good.
It feels weird that untapping my creatures is a theme that has happened in a few of my decks, but Gleam of Resistance is one of these cards where, like, the first time I put it in a deck, I was like, okay, so, like, I only need to buy the 1 because this card is garbage literally in every other situation. And I just bought 1 copy of it. And now I'm like, it's in, like, 4 of my decks now, and I'm like, how does this keep happening?
How does it keep happening? Now I gotta borrow from other decks? Yeah, I've been there before.
So the TLDR of this is that I don't think that... I think the list of PDH staples is very small and very conditional. There's not really cards that you look at and you say, this card is literally good in every. That said, there are a couple cards that come close to that, and we should mention some of them.
Yeah, I think every color/artifact has a handful of them. Just like any format, anything that has to do with Magic the Gathering. There are definitely semi-staples or excellent cards within each color.
So, like, your deck is going to have a theme.
Yeah, and
it wants to do something very specific. But also, as it does that specific thing, it is going to want to get mana, draw cards, and answer threats. So, like, the cards that show up as staples are, like, usually that collection.
Right. They usually fill one of those 3 requirements. We don't have the luxury of just putting in fluff for the most part, unless it's just a pet card or something silly like that. But yeah, like we've already mentioned before earlier in the show, like Arcane Signet and Bonder's Ornament. I think in that category we could probably throw in like Network Terminal, and Honored Heirloom. Those 2 I will admit that I don't play nearly enough with.
That's fair.
But I definitely think they are very very valuable artifacts for a lot of decks.
Agree. And even at this, I think that Network Terminal and Honored Heirloom are really close to, like, staples, but, like, even they depend on the meta. Like, Network Terminal requires a certain threshold of artifacts in your deck before it starts really functioning, and Honored Heirloom is bad unless you're playing against graveyard decks. And it's so powerful against graveyard decks that I think it has a place in just about every deck, but, like, if you're not going to run it, that's a perfectly defensible decision. It's not in all of my decks, so I've made that decision many times.
Yeah, I mean, it could be one of those decks where, if you literally have no idea what the next opponent's going to play and you need to open up a slot from your deck to add in this new card or what have you, I think Honored Heirloom is a good card to take out, in my opinion. I'd be like, well, I can't guarantee that there's going to be graveyard shenanigans, but I can guarantee that the card I want to put in is going to get use every single game. So
I did the same thing with Relic of Preventers years ago when I started playing. I had it in basically all my decks. It's like, I'm going to catch someone's graveyard nonsense, or if I don't, like,
one of these days.
It sort of cycles, right? Like, if you're not going to catch someone's graveyard, you can just cycle it. But, like,
you could draw a card.
But, like, even that I've been cutting from decks more lately, just because, like, some of the decks I cut it from are because my deck is doing graveyard things. I'm not going to exile my own graveyard. Like, some of them are, some of the decks are just like...
Yeah, that's a good point, too.
If someone... Like, this deck is so just casual and silly that if someone rolls up with a graveyard deck, like, I'm just going to let it happen. Like, we'll just race, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, we'll just see what happens. Yeah, but that was a good point, too. I didn't think about the fact that regardless of the deck I'm trying to brew or the deck that I want to build next, it almost always has a non-zero percentage of cards that actually care about my own graveyard.
Yeah.
And I always, and I'll never draw the Relic or the Honored Heirloom until I need my own graveyard for something.
Yeah.
So that's just how it goes.
say don't do.
But yeah, those are just a handful of the artifacts. We didn't want to get into like all the different color pair signets and the clue stones and all that sort of stuff. I think the signets are pretty close to staple mana rocks, I guess you could call it. I don't really consider like the key runes and the clue stones to be staples. They're okay if you need them. I like them. I like to play them. I just think they're cool cards, but I would never consider them like a staple.
I used to consider the lockets very staple-ish because I had
Locket, that's the other one I was trying to think
slots
of.
in my decks for 3 mana rocks that could draw me cards in a pinch. And like these days, I've replaced pretty much all of them with bondage ornament.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, we got, if we want to move into the colors, white staples look mostly, the role of white is mostly going to be removal and protection. Things like Oblivion Ring, Journey to Nowhere, maybe Benevolent Blessings, an excellent newer card. And then you got your go wide decks or go wide, creatures like Spirited Companion that and the other ETB draw creatures that we've had, like, I want to say 2 to 5 of them in the last year and a half, and they're all seeing play, like in 60 card constructed and PDH, like they're everywhere because white has never had that before, so they're kind of going ham at the moment.
Which is very exciting.
Yeah, it is. It is really cool. We had the Priest of Ancient Lore, I believe it was, and then like within the same standard rotation, they printed the Inspiring Overseer, which was just strictly better. Like instant power creep 8 months later.
That was wild. And like we had the one that reduces its own cost based on attackers. Now we have the one that's just a 3-mana 2/2. Yeah.
And then we got with the downshifts we got from Double Masters.
Oh, was there another one?
Even better.
Maybe.
There was we got like Militia Bugler and
the Bugler.
Yeah, the Bugler.
I completely forgot about that guy.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I've never played with him before, so I'm not sure what I'm gonna do with him, but I can recognize that it's a very good card.
For sure.
So
I'm gonna slide us on in blue. The closest thing we have to staples in blue are Treasure Cruise, Taxing Probe, Counterspell, and Arcane Denial. Cruise and Probe, Cruise is the most powerful draw spell we have. We were talking about wheels earlier. Cruise is as close as we get to wheel. It's a late game refill your hand.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Probe is just free. You can kind of CD and everything. It's not bad.
Yep.
And yeah.
It's just free value.
Counterspell and Arcane are just the 2 most powerful counter magic we have, so they're just great universal answers.
Yeah, and I'd almost be willing to say that Arcane is a little stronger than OG Counterspell just because it's easier to cast. Is that something you would agree with, or how do you feel about those two versus each other?
I think Arcane Denial is the better card.
Okay.
Partly because it's easier to cast, yes. So it goes into 2-card decks much more easily. But also partly because it draws you a card.
Yeah, it does replace itself.
Like, if you want to think about the card draw as kind of like, if the card draw were on even footing, you drawing a card would be balanced by each of your 3 opponents drawing. And this is giving them 1 card less than that in total, while still giving you a card. So, like, I think that the card draw in Arcane Denial is a huge point in its favor. It's a hard counterspell, 2 mana that replaces itself. I don't care what else it does. It's just the best counterspell in the format.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, and it's so funny when I know we're talking about PDH versus EDH or whatever. It's so funny when you look at cards, 60 card Pauper versus PDH. Like, Arcane Denial sees play in exactly 1 deck in 60 card Pauper, and that's pretty much it. It goes into Turbo Fog, and that's the only deck you'll see it played in. But in PDH, if you're running Islands, it's probably in there somewhere.
Yeah.
It's just that good of a card. But like, other than Turbo Fog, if you're playing any other 60 card Pauper deck, you don't want your opponents drawing 2 cards because that's 60 cards. They're going to draw that much closer to their answer or to their win con or what have you.
Yes, it's a very mediocre counterspell in 1v1, but in multiplayer, in many of my blue decks, it's the only counterspell. I'm just not interested in counter magic except for this one that replaces itself. And in casual games, I think of it as like an apology counterspell. It's like, you can't have that thing that was going to ruin my entire day, but you get to draw cards. So, like, don't feel bad.
But here's some cards in exchange. But yeah, I think I'm the same way. Like, I may use like Lofty Denial or something like that in my Spirits deck, but that's just because it's more flavorful than anything, I think. But yeah, who'd have thunk it? Some of the blue staples are all really good card draw spells.
Shocking. Spoiler alert.
And straight up counterspell. But black's really no different. It actually, some of black's most powerful things it can do in PDH is also card draw. Things like Knight's Whisper, that rocketed up in price a little while back because of actual EDH. But yeah, we got like Read the Bone, Sign in Blood, Crushing Disappointment's been one of my new favorites lately that I try to jam in every deck. And then, we got so many, just as for all the black draw spells we have just as many, if not more, like murder effects or removal spells in black. Things like Snuff Out is probably the most powerful black removal spell almost ever printed at common. Victim of Night is a super powerful, often overlooked card. Obnixis's Cruelty is excellent. Feed the Serpent, Feed the Swarm, that sort of thing. Granted, they all have a significant drawback of some sort, usually at the cost of your own life, but what you're willing to destroy is generally outweighs that quite a bit. And I'm a huge fan. Night's Whisper is probably one of my favorite black spells, period.
I didn't know it had gone up in price.
So that definitely goes in every deck.
I didn't know it had gone up. When was that?
Yeah, I hadn't checked in a while. I think it's gone down a little bit, but for a while, it's down to like the $2 to $3 range. I want to say, where are we at? I want to say about a year and a half ago, each printing was pushing like $6.
I've been honestly avoiding it a little bit lately because I feel like it's the generic version, and I feel like a lot of my decks are trying to do something, and there's 10 different versions of it. Like you can find someone that does that plus a little extra for your deck. In Navier, I like Pointed Discussion, and the one that gives you a food token.
Forbidden Fruit. I think that's the removal spell, right? It gives you a
Bacon to the Pie is the removal with the food token.
That's what I was
there's a draw spell that if it was adamant, if you played it with 3 black mana, then you get a food as well. Like these things, like in mill decks, I like the ones that mill you first, funeral rites, and then atrocious experiment. So I've been kind of leaning away from Night's Whisper lately, and I haven't had to buy like a chunk of them to put in decks, so I didn't know that it had spiked, but that's interesting.
Yeah, I did. I happen to have I don't know, I think I had 4 or 6 of them anyway, just from the sheer amount of like regular pauper decks I built, 60 card decks I built. So I already had them. It was just something that kind of like Deadly Dispute. It was just something I was tracking for a while. Like, hey, how annoying is this? Like, why is this a $6 card that doesn't get reprinted hardly ever? But then they had that Secret Lair version, and I think that may have knocked it down, or it just fell out of favor with EDH players. I'm not really sure, but either way, it's down to just a couple bucks. The one you were thinking about was Foreboding Fruit.
Foreboding.
Yeah, I actually do not play this one for some reason. I think the 3 black. I always look at the adamant. The adamant cards throw me off, like because I want to spend all that mana, all that one color mana on them, and I feel like I'm never going to.
Adamant is a really well designed. You read the card and you're like, oh, that'll be easy, and then you're playing a game and you're like, this isn't easy. Like, what have I done? It completely throws off your ability to actually evaluate the card.
Yeah, but I did too. I liked that mechanic quite a bit. They had some creatures with it on there, some spells. Yeah, it was pretty fun. But no, that's one I totally forgot about. Yeah, still draw 2, lose 2 life. Yep,
it's excellent. My Nautier deck is mono black. I have it paired with another black partner, so the adamant's not a problem. And the token is great for Nautier. So it's really good for me in that deck.
Yeah, there you go. I think the only adamant cards I run are in the mono colored PDH decks I have, so
very defensive.
Shouldn't be a problem. Yeah. Right.
I'm gonna slide us on over to red. Okay.
Yeah.
So it was weird writing down this list of red-ish staples because my lizard brain was like Lightning Bolt, obviously, and then I thought about it and I was like, actually, I run Lightning Bolt in very few decks. It seems like it's this, the quintessential red card, but it's kind of not in PDH. For I think the same reason that Lotus Petal is not the quintessential mana ramp card. You need your cards to have a much bigger impact than just a 3 damage. And not always. It still gets played a lot. It's a solid card.
Yeah, it's still a very good card. It's just not to that level.
The cards that do show up in an enormous amount of my red decks are Reckless Impulse, Thrill of Possibility, Electric Revelation, the cards that just give you access to more cards. There's a big debate about what the words card advantage actually means here, so you could argue that these are or not card advantage, or maybe they're card selection, virtual card advantage.
Card selection, they're virtual card advantage, whatever you want to call it. And not just the quote-unquote, or whatever you want to label it, card advantage with those 3 you just listed, but they also fit into, they work well with other strategies too, or archetypes.
For spell slinging.
Yep.
There's very little.
But yeah, it was funny. Oh, I was just going to say that is funny that you said that about Lightning Bolt, because it's a staple in every 60 card format that can play it, that it's legal in. But you look at it in PDH
Yeah.
sometimes, and you're like, it's only 3 damage. You know,
In the 60 card,
sometimes
in
that
the
just
60
doesn't
card
cut
format, you can run 3 of them, and you only have to
it,
count
or doesn't
one.
feel like it'll cut it.
No. In PDH, you only get one of them, and you have to count them. So
Right, exactly.
there's very different. 3 damage is
Yes, not quite the same
still,
math.
It has a lot of values of instant speed removal spell for little guys. It's not as ubiquitous as you'd expect from a card.
Yeah, absolutely.
As famous as
Now, when you're digging with red spells and getting your advantage, whether it's actual or virtual, what do you feel about like a Faithless Looting in PDH?
I actually really dislike Faithless Looting in this format. I feel like I've had this conversation many times where I feel like someone is fairly new to PDH, and they'll show up on the Discord and they'll show me a deck that they designed that uses Faithless Looting. Or they'll play against me, they'll cast Faithless Looting a couple times. And in my experience, they're always sort of surprised when they cast Faithless Looting, and afterwards they have fewer cards. They're like, how did this spell that says draw 2 cards, like, take cards out of my hand? And like this card has been banned in like everything. Like, what happened here? Why is my hand smaller? Right. And like, you have to realize that it's banned in formats where you have access to a lot of madness, or like hollow, or you can do graveyard shenanigans. Like,
yeah, exactly. And it's banned in formats where you can play 4 of them. It's
not the card advantage powerhouse that you think it is in PDA. If you're using the madness, if you're doing a graveyard strategy and you want to be putting cards into your graveyard so that you can use them from there later, like, great. It's a great card for you there. If you're doing just like a very simple like gruel beatdown deck, like, this will reduce the number of cards in your hand. You will have less after you cast it than before you casted it. So
yeah, the first time you cast it, I mean, you're technically down 3 cards.
Yeah, you lose 3 and
you know, and
get 2.
This would be one of those, for the example I gave earlier, like the Mardu Good Stuff PDH deck. Like, this would go in there, but it doesn't really do much. It's just a good card on its own, but not in a deck that just has good cards in it.
Yes. It's a good card in the right context. If you're not building around that context, it does very well.
Yep. Yeah, outside of that, I think that's a pretty decent handful of, you know, we're not calling these staples necessarily. They're just cards that, like, I know you do and I do as well. Like, when I'm looking at a deck, or I want to tweak a deck I found online, or I'm trying to brew one from scratch, these are sort of the cards I go to first and foremost in whatever colors I decide to be in, or whatever mechanic I decide to brew up, or what have you. But, you know, a decent percentage of the time, they won't make the final cut. They're just sort of where I start.
I kind of do that backwards. Like, when I start brewing up a deck, I'll do database searches for whatever I think the theme or the major mechanic or the thing is. Like, when I was building the Sivers deck, I did a database search for all the black blue commons that had Unearth, because I wanted Sivers to put all these cards in my graveyard so I could unearth them and then flicker them and just do weird shenanigans like that. So I started with the flickers, the Unearths,
right.
A couple Encores, a couple Escapes, and then after I had done all that, how many spaces are still left in the deck? Like, I'll fill those in with Behold the Multiverse, Feed the Serpent, Feed the Snake, Omidare. They're like space fillers for the rest of the deck after I've established the major themes and mechanics.
Yeah, then that's where those extra slots, like you were just saying, that's where the quote-unquote good stuff pile, you know, comes from. You know, we can't just make 100 cards in good stuff pile. We got to make like 25 or 15 or 40 or whatever you have left after you've already established what your deck is about.
Sometimes there's no room left at all. So you were saying, you know, you start with those and sometimes they get cut. But sometimes I just never get to them at all and they stay cut. Like with Mayhem Devil, like if you're doing this deck building strategy where you make a list of all the cards that could work well with your commander and then cut from there, the Mayhem Devil list starts at about 300 cards, and you have to get that down to like 60. So like.
Well, I have not tried to brew Mayhem Devil yet. I've looked at decks online, like established lists, but I haven't tried to brew it myself. But I have noticed that, like, no matter what commander I pick, whether it's a 2022 pushed uncommon that Wizards just released, or it's an uncommon from 15 years ago, whenever I go through my bulk and I write down cards and I get them all, like the actual cardboards in my hand, I end up with almost exactly 135 cards, like every single time I try to build a deck. No matter what the colors are, I have to cut 36 to 40 cards every single time. Never more than that,
It's
never
very
less
consistent.
than that for some reason.
That's good.
Yeah, it's very consistent, but it's very frustrating because they're all like, "Oh, I just like it so much."
Yeah.
But that's a whole like different episode. But yeah, lastly, we didn't mention a lot of direct damage or go into the face or anything like that for red, which red's known for. But in green, we're definitely going to talk about some of the stuff that green does very well, and it does very well in every format, especially PDH, because a lot of the stronger like ramp spells, mana fixing spells, that sort of thing, were printed at common in green because mainly for like the limited environment and that sort of thing. But cards like Cultivate, Grow from the Ashes, you can throw Mana Dorks in there if you wanted to. And then we started getting, in the last couple of years, we started getting these stronger cards like Llanowar Visionary. That's a Mana Dork that comes into play and you draw a card, or like Cerulf's Packmate, who doesn't really have anything other than a huge body and you get to draw a card. So we could spend another whole episode talking about awesome green ramp spells and Utopia Sprawls and Abundant Growth and that sort of thing. But I think that's generally, I know me personally, when I'm building a deck with green in it, I'm not looking for any specific ramp. I'm just looking for ones that I think will fit what my deck's trying to do. How do you approach ramp in your green X decks?
That's a really good question. So it depends on the deck. I have a couple decks that want to ramp by doing land auras and then untapping those lands. I have a couple decks that want to ramp with there's a certain subset of these green fetch cards that don't say get basic lands. They say like get a forest or like get a plains.
Yeah.
If I need fixing really bad, I'll use those set of cards, like Into the North and Skyshroud Claim and 3 Visits.
Yeah.
Nature's Lore might be one of them as well. I'll use those cards with the snow duels that have the different land types.
Yeah, from Kaldheim.
If I just kind of want generic fixing, I'll do the Grow from the Ashes, Cultivate. Those are just incredibly solid baseline cards. If I think I'm going to have a lot of creatures to sacrifice or stuff in the grave, a couple of my favorite old cards are Far Wanderings. It's really good with Threshold.
Mm-hmm.
And
Primal
Primal Growth. It's really good if you can sacrifice a creature.
Yeah, so too, I guess the long and short of that is you don't really have staples yourself either for that. It's also more dependent on what your deck's trying to do. Like you started that off with your land auras. I love those because they're auras and they're enchantments and whatever, but I think the only deck I have them in is like my Satyr Enchanter list. I don't just throw them in every deck, even though they're awesome in that list.
Yes. Yeah, I use those in like parcels.
Yeah. I love them. Like they're just pet cards because they are enchantments and stuff, but it took me a while to understand that not every, just because it's a decent green card doesn't mean it goes in every green deck or green based deck.
Which is, I think, the overarching theme of this entire episode.
Yeah, probably could be. But yeah, going through the whole thing in the show notes and kind of thinking about what we've been talking about and the listeners have been sitting through, I think what really draws me to PDH, what really sort of like drew me in to begin with, is I like the challenge that PDH presents as like a way to get creative with my brews, let my Johnny personality or whatever shine through. Or even with like tier decks, I can tweak them a little bit. There's room to play around with them. We don't have wizards like printing precons and printing all these powerful cards that you have to play or you're gonna lose. We don't have them telling us what to play. The only thing we really have telling us what to play are the archetypes themselves.
Yeah, I think that you said it perfect. The only thing I would like to add is that we have talked a little bit about so much of card quality being very dependent on your commander and the directions that your commander is going.
Mm-hmm.
I'm worried that some people might be hearing this and thinking, it sounds like this format is very deterministic. Like, you pick the Unearthed commander, you get all the Unearthed cards.
Okay, that's a good point.
And I want to say that it is definitely not deterministic. There's much more than any other format I've ever played. This is the format you can come to just do something crazy, express yourself. You can find a commander that no one has ever built before. You can find a commander that people have built a dozen times, and you can find the 13th build of this deck that takes it in a new, weird direction.
Right.
Yeah. I have a Lagrella deck.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, Lagrella the Magpie, she flickers things when she enters. The really confusing one. I built the real
confusing one
with every single energy card. Yeah, I'm just gonna like tuck the energy cards under
That's
Lagrella and
amazing.
then flicker her so that they come back and I get more energy, and then I'll tuck a proliferate card, and like you can just do whatever you want, man. You can play Lagrella flicker, you can play Lagrella energy. Like I'm sure there's other extremely cool Lagrella builds that I've never seen or even thought of. Like, this is far from deterministic. You can pick a direction, see where it takes you.
Yeah, and I think that's really well said too, because when you look at like social media and stuff, and someone will say like a new card will get spoiled, and Joe Bob will be like, "Oh, that's gonna go great in my Becky deck." Everybody knows what Becky does. Everybody knows 75% of the cards that are in Becky's deck, or Becky the commander in that deck. But here we don't have that. Like you were just saying, Lagrella, like there could be 15 different builds of Lagrella. Like it's all a matter of what kind of style you want to put into it, what kind of deck you like to play. There's just not set decks for each commander. And it's like that for just about every uncommon creature we have access to.
There's a couple of them where you're like, okay, if this is your commander, you have to be playing with a couple of these cards. Like if you're building Rilsa, you have to include all of the initiative cards. But there's
right. Because we don't have that many to begin with, so you might as well just use every single one of them.
Right. There's exactly 4 initiative cards in Rilsa's colors, so like this is not a huge imposition. You can handle putting the 4 cards in the Rilsa deck and still be creative with whatever else.
And that's just the commander and less than half a dozen initiative cards. There's still 93 more cards for you to do what you want to with. I'm actually building Rilsa now, and I was looking at, I think I scrolled through like 6 or 7 Rilsa decks on Moxfield, and every one of them, I mean, they had the same kind of core package, a lot of the same creatures, same lands, obviously, but each one was just different enough that I wish I could like cram them all together, because each one had their own little flavor, their own spin on it, and it was very eye-opening, I guess, because even though Rilsa is very like, this is what I'm doing, and you want Death Touch, and you want to venture into dungeons, and you want to do this very specific thing, all the decks were pretty different from one another.
I focused mine very heavily on creatures that had tramp. So I think that bottle golems. I think that bottle golems is a slam dunk in Rilsa. Because once you finish that dungeon, she gives things 5 power, Death Touch, First Strike, and Menace. Like that plus trample means that you're having a good time.
And I saw some builds that were like replace everything you just said about trample, but with lifelink.
Oh yeah, well,
and that's what they built their deck around. And they would throw in like security bypass, and they would have this 9/9 swinging in by itself that connives with lifelink. It was just crazy.
I never thought of that, which is the point.
Awesome.
There's so much space for brewing. You can follow your dreams. You can live your best life.
You really can. I think that's an excellent way to put it. I think that might about wrap it up. You have anything else you want to add to the to what we were talking about? I tried to sum up the show in like 2 words, and I couldn't come up with a way to do it.
What we were talking about. That's the perfect summary.
Yeah.
No, I have nothing I want to add. I feel like I'm pretty talked out.
Yeah, same here. I do want to thank everyone that tuned in this week, though. But in the meantime, if you want to get more Pauper Commander talk, or you have any questions about the formats or specific commanders or anything we talked about on this show, you can email us at thepdhpod@gmail.com. You can head on over to PDH's home base website or their Discord that you'll find on their website. You can hit me up on Twitter at Pauper_B, or you can hit up Liam at Pauper Command. He's also got his giveaway going on until July 8th, which I think this episode will release on July 8th, but I'm not sure what time of day his giveaway is. But he's giving away some borderless Commander, we're talking about Commander all day, Double Masters 2 Bounce Land giveaways on Twitter. I think he's doing 2 or 4 of them, or the whole set. I don't know. Either way, it's pretty sweet giveaway. But we'll put all the links down in the details of the episode. And then Alkadron, where can the people find you if they want to bug you about commanders?
I'm Alkadron on Discord. I'm Alkadron on Reddit.
Yep. And Moxfield, too. That's how I find some of your decks. And you do, I don't know, you said you have like 80 PDH decks. You probably have like 5 times that on Moxfield, because every time I put in a commander's name on Moxfield, like you're in that list. Like you have a deck there.
I'm very prolific on Moxfield.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. But yeah, as episode 5 of the PDH Pod comes to a close, first I want to thank MTG Brad for letting us use their original music for the show. And from everyone in here to everyone out there, go ahead and brew a deck and then play some games, and we'll see you in about a week. Peace.
Cheers.
I brought Pauper decks to the party. Pauper. I brought Pauper decks to the party.